Senator Norby was born into a family that had a history in politics. His father, Senator Leonard Chabert, was a state senator from 1980 to 1991. He was initially a school teacher, later became a member of the school board, was then elected to the police jury in Little Caillou before ambitiously running for state representative and then the state senate.
He was defeated, but it was a blessing for the family because he had left teaching and gone into the boat business. And that was a time when the oil field was really, really booming, and it allowed those 4 years of him not being in politics. It really allowed him to focus on his business and his family. And he had 4 young kids. I wasn't in the picture yet. This was, the late 60s, and he really started to make some money, develop some wealth, become a pretty good businessman, and had a very strong boat company.
When Norby was born in 1975, his dad had just won a seat in the Louisiana House of Representatives.
It was a real high point for us as a family. Both he and my mother were really, really, really poor. My mother was a daughter of a trapper. No one in any aspect of their family, be it the rich uncle or a brother that made good, that never happened in their family. So to be living a life of success in business, and now at that time in politics, it was an interesting time to be born for me, I guess, because my family struggles were behind me.
Norby remembers when he began school at the age of 5 significantly because his dad had just switched from the House of Representatives to the state senate. It was also an important time for his family because they had a boating business, and it was the beginning of the end of the oil boom Louisiana had experienced for the past 20 years.
It was tough to be the senator's son, so to speak, because everybody thought y'all had everything, y'all were fancy, y'all were rich, and that really wasn't the case.
The tough struggle with being the senator's son eased up for Norby when he was in high school. His friends began to understand that Senator Leonard Chabert was not necessarily known for what he had, but rather for what he had done for people. Unfortunately, this was also a time when Norby's dad was fighting a tough battle with cancer. He passed away in 1991.
Just 2 years prior to his death, he had led a revolt in the Senate that overthrew the power system of the governor. And he died as the president pro tem of the Senate and the chairman of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee, which is the number 2 position in the Senate and arguably the second strongest committee in the entire legislature. So to go from a poor boy from cut-off Louisiana to have gone through all of that, I would say that he led a great life, and he certainly was a massive influence on me.
Norby says that after hearing he'd be the next senator for his entire life, it was the absolute last thing that was on his agenda. It was, however, his older brother's plan.
Marty wanted to be whatever Dad wanted him to be, and my father worked Marty very, very hard growing up. He was always at his side. He taught him every trick of the trade.
Marty had dropped out of college to help his dad when their boating business was at its peak. What no one could foresee, however, was that the oil field industry in Louisiana was about to plummet. Marty was able to learn from this jump from complete success to an utter downfall from both a business and political standpoint. Prior to his passing in 1991, Senator Leonard Chabert announced that he was not going to run for re-election. Marty decided to run for his father's seat. There were several leading opponents in the race, but Marty pulled out a remarkable win in the second primary. At this time, Norby was 16 years old and in high school. Along with the natural challenges of a 16-year-old boy, Norby had just lost his father, and his brother had just become a state senator.
Because he had been by my father's side for so long, every circle that my father ran in, we still had that loyal support because they had known Marty, watched Marty grow up.
Norby says that although things were changing, life was still the same, with the exception of one thing: technology. Technology was changing, and it was allowing the students of the 90s to think in a way they had never thought before.
The year after I graduated high school, in 1994, in what is now commonplace, the man walks out on the stage to his shareholders, to his stakeholders that may be in the company and working, and he unveils the new product. Steve Jobs mastered it. But in 1995 was really the first time that had ever happened. And that man that walked out on that stage was Bill Gates. And he introduced Windows 95 to the world. And really, everything changed after that. Being in high school in that time was really, it was awesome. You know, it was extremely informational. I'm happy that I was in high school at a time when there was this generational change occurring. And I got to watch government up close. And it really, really got me interested.
Norby moved home in 1995 from the University of Lafayette to help run his brother's re-election campaign when his brother decided that he was no longer going to run. Norby took a year off to figure out who he was, bartended, and decided to go to Nicholls State University.
That was as big of a life-changing event for me as anything that has ever happened. Because the day after he decided not to run, and when qualifying for the Senate closed, and he was no longer going to be the senator, it was going to be the first time in my life, and I was 20. It's the first time in my life that I was not going to be Senator Chalbert's son or brother.
Norby was enjoying his time in college and his anonymity from politics when he was asked to represent Al Gore in a speech forum debating the best presidential candidate in the 2000 presidential election. Though he was not a huge Al Gore fan, Norby played the part and flawlessly delivered a closing argument explaining the pros of having Al Gore as a president.
Dr. Antizzo and the two heads of the speech department at the time came up out and they were like, you blew that speech out of the water. Like, how long did you prep for that? I said, I didn't prep at all for that, really. I just went up there and kind of did it. He's like, we noticed you didn't have any notes and you just spoke. And I was like, yeah. And Antizzo, debating me daily in government class, wasn't surprised at that. But it was funny. He's like, I didn't agree with anything you said. He says, but you blew the Tucci out of the water.
After giving the speech, it was the first time in years that Norby had acknowledged that his family had ever been in politics.
I'm never going to forget this as long as I live. Like, I looked up at the sky and I said, that was for you. And it was the first time that, like, in 4 years or 5 years, I had even acknowledged that we had been in politics or government. It's almost like I had turned my back on that chapter of my life. But that was when I realized that this is what I should be doing in some way. More than anything, it was a moment of self-realization that, hey, not only can you do this, but you're good at it.
After graduating from Nicholls, Norby had planned to go to law school. Instead, he landed a job working on Mary Landrieu's re-election campaign. It was his first time being a part of politics for years, and he says that it felt great to be back on his own accord. Norby also learned that campaigning was very enjoyable for him.
Now being someone who was working in a major campaign capacity, I got a lot of respect for just being me and not being somebody's son or brother.
After the campaign was over, Norby realized he was actually not a liberal, but rather a conservative, and worked on several Republican campaigns. Norby decided at the end of the election for Billy Tozan III for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District, he was going to go into policy with this group of people. Unfortunately, they lost the race by 569 votes. Norby had no clue where he would go from there, but an array of natural disasters would soon point him in the right direction. Norby was at the Superdome the night before contraflow began for the evacuation for Hurricane Katrina. the same Superdome that he had no idea would soon house several New Orleans citizens that would have no place to go. Hurricane Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike succeeded in frustrating Norby enough to run for office to fix the flooding issues that tormented his family and friends annually.
My brother, Lenny, who's never been involved in politics in his life, looked at me as we stood with floodwaters up to our shins that second time, and he just said, if you are ever going to run for office, you need to run now. He says the people will be behind you. And he was right. And you go back and you look at all that stuff and you ask yourself, have I been successful? Or whether I succeeded or I failed at any of the things that I've tried. Since I got elected, we've pumped over $1 billion into hurricane protection in this area. And you know what? My house ain't gonna flood no more. And there are so many houses in so many areas in the low-lying parts of this parish that ain't gonna flood no more. And I have to think that I've done a good job. I have to think that I did what the people demanded that I do. I never put my personal politics in front of my people. I've always remembered where I've come from. I never ever let being the senator get to my head. I have no idea what the future holds for me. But one thing that I know is that I think I did my job.